Welcome to the Youth Sport Podcast. My name is Rihanna Poskin, and I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly within youth sport. It feels great when a kid comes up to you and says, "Coach, because of you, my life changed in the best way." It would feel awful to hear that because of you, the coach, a kid doesn't want to have anything to do with it ever again. I believe that kids deserve to have fun, to learn, to grow, to compete, and to play in a great environment. Join me as I interview guests that spill the tea on youth sport in order to help you make an enormous impact with kids right now. This episode of the Youth Sport Podcast is brought to you by Lululemon. I am part of the Lululemon Collective and will receive commissions when you shop through my link. Buying something for you or your loved ones, like my favorite warm down joggers, helps me to continue to bring interesting and empowering conversations for everyone. I have to tell you, when I'm coaching, I want to make sure that I'm dressed appropriately, I'm comfortable, my clothes stand up to all kinds of random situations, and that I have pockets. You never know who's going to ask you to hold something for them or what random things you need to carry with you. The Lululemon warm down joggers take care of all of my needs. I invite you to find your go-to item by browsing through the entire Lululemon site. You won't be disappointed. Please use the link provided in the video description below to start shopping. Welcome back to another episode of the Youth Sport Podcast. I have a guest today, and I'm really excited for you guys to listen to Dr. Heather Logan Sprenger. She is a Ph.D. and a CSCS, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. I'm going to read you her bio because it's super impressive, and you'll get an idea of how much knowledge we can pull from Dr. Logan Sprenger today. She received her Ph.D. degree from the Department of Human Health and Nutritional Sciences at the University of Guelph, which is in Guelph, Ontario. Her graduate research was funded by the Gatorade Sport Science Institute, where Dr. Sprenger's specialty involved in investigating the effects of exercise-induced hydration on physiological responses, substrate oxidation, muscle metabolism, and performance. So a lot of big words. We're going to be jumping into some things here, but we're going to break it down in a really fun way. We're going to make hydration super fun. So with the Gatorade Sport Science Institute, she combined her academics with applied physiology testing of professional athletes and teams in regards to fluid dynamics and fueling pre and post training competition while providing knowledge translation with tangible performance plans. So I want to just highlight that because as coaches, we may not think about these plans that we could have in place, and it could be something very simple. So Dr. Sprenger is going to tell us a little bit about the things that we can do with our youth athletes in order to optimize their performance. From 2012 to 2017, Dr. Sprenger directed sport physiology and research and innovation at the Canadian Sport Institute, Ontario, where she provided physiology consulting to national and provincial sport organizations and conducted applied sport research with the goal to mitigate performance and knowledge gaps by answering key questions impacting athlete and coach success. Now, this part is really cool. She is a two-sport national team athlete. Not many people can do that, with a combined 15 years experience competing at the international level in both ice hockey and professional road cycling. Dr. Sprenger applies her experience and knowledge as an athlete, coach, applied practitioner, academic, and researcher to the areas of nutritional sport and environmental physiology to enhance training adaptation and performance. Dr. Sprenger is currently an assistant professor at Ontario Tech University in the Faculty of Health Sciences and at the University of Toronto. As well, she continues to be the Director of Research and Innovation at the Canadian Sport Institute, Ontario, and is an active member of Own the Podium's National Sport Research Council. She has coached athletes in the scope of strength and conditioning, training, prescription and periodization, nutritional ergogenics, environmental acclimation, assessing internal and external responses to exercise training from amateur to professional, both in Olympic and Paralympic sport. Holy moly, that is a lot. You've done so much. It's amazing.
It's funny when it's written down like that because I don't ever I don't think like that, right? Like, it's just funny to hear it on paper, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's been fun. Yeah.
No, it's great. And it's really exciting to chat with you because we were connected through mutual friends and they're like, you have to talk to her. This woman is incredible. And they were just like, so we can see the park from our backyard. And when she goes out there and she's playing, you just know that she is good at whatever she does. So they were saying she's shooting baskets. And it's like, it's not like, your typical person at the park shooting baskets. This woman is like basketball, like high level performance. And you were maybe as a kid maybe playing basketball, we'll get into that a little bit, but your main sports were hockey and cycling. So are you just naturally gifted? Are you good at everything?
I don't know about that, but I just love every sport. Like, I was a true multi-sport athlete who just gobbles up any sport.
Yeah.
Like, so I don't know. I feel like I could compete at a high level in multiple different sports. It was just about access to me when I was a kid. But yeah, I just love to play. Like, I just love playing.
Yeah. And
But
was that all the way from the beginning? What kind of a kid were you? Were you just always looking to play something?
yeah, I definitely was. I loved adventure. I loved games. I could spend the entire day outside. I was very independent. I played by myself a ton. I had a lot of energy, but I was quiet too, and I loved to learn. So I felt like I had the qualities to really be teachable. And so yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that was the type of kid. I spent all day outside just playing sports, building my fort, dressing up like a pirate, playing any type of game. I just wanted to have fun. And I feel like I'm still that kid. Like, when we go outside with my kids, which is awesome. I love being a mom for that reason. I'm like, let's just play, capture the flag, whatever it is. It's just fun.
Yeah. And how old are your kids?
I have a daughter who's turning 8 in a few weeks, and I have a son who's 4. That will be 5 in December.
Awesome. Awesome. And do you have siblings? Did you have like a solid family foundation that was always built around play, or were you kind of like creating this on your own?
Yeah, I have 2 older sisters. So I'm the youngest of 3 girls. They weren't into sports at all. My oldest sister, was a music, could play any instrument, thrived in the music and arts. My middle sister wanted to be good at sports, but she was in the shadow of me. And so she developed a real love for art. And she's an exceptional artist. And she actually has a PhD in the same field as me. Yeah, but my mom wasn't a sports person at all. And she really was about developing the whole person, developing the character of us when we were little, and giving us opportunities, not only just isolated to sport. And my dad got a scholarship to a Canadian university for football, and he was an all-around athlete. And so he was my playmate, really. And I grew up in a Northern Ontario town that really had no access to very, very little sports. And so it was hockey in the winter or figure skating. And in the summer, it was softball. And that was it. So I was basically forced into whatever sport that was available. But then my dad really was like, let's play this, let's play that, let's have World Cup of soccer today, let's play badminton, because I was that type of kid who wanted to. So yeah, it was different. Like, my sister, certainly, I didn't play with them. It was more, okay, my mom was about, let's do piano, let's developing the music side, and let's talk about character and character development and building a whole person.
Nice. It's nice that you say that you were able to find success in sport, even though you were from a rural town, because I know where I am in Peterborough, we've got a decent amount of access for kids. But 2 hours north of us, we've got a tiny little town where my parents live. And those kids have to travel like crazy in order to just be able to have something organized. So was hockey a kind of a foundation in your town that you were able to have an organized setup with that?
Yeah, that's correct. So it was basically hockey and figure skating were the only organized winter sports in the town. So there was a minor hockey league, which I started with my sisters in figure skating, and it wasn't a right fit from day one. I just wanted to race the boys around the rink. And so my dad said, why don't we try Heather in hockey? So we went into hockey, and I loved it from day one. But it was basically hockey or nothing. And it was a very small town of 1,500 people, but I was thankful that they did have one organized sport. And in the summers, they tried to organize soccer, they tried to organize other sports, but there wasn't the volume of kids to be able to do anything. And the closest big city was an hour and a half away. So it really posed a problem as a child to be able to play any sports, really. So I just signed up for baseball every year, and then I would just play outside with friends or my dad. But yeah, I was thankful that they had organized softball in the summer and organized hockey in the winter.
Yeah, that's cool. I think the conversation right now is trying to keep kids active for life. And
Mhm.
even if you don't have anything organized, because there's issues with organized sports as well. So what you're talking about is really key, just to try and figure out, how do we keep kids playing? What can they do so that they can still develop their athleticism without it having to be super structured? And clearly you're an example of somebody that was able to do that, and then going on to two national teams in two different sports. So if anybody is listening and you live in a rural area, I mean, there's different ways to move. And so I love that you're saying this, because we don't have to have limitations on us just based on where we are. Obviously, there's going to be changes that, like if you're in a city, you may not have access to space. That could be a huge thing for some people. But if you're in a rural area, you probably have unlimited space. And so it's a matter of being creative with what you have, which is really cool. So that's really awesome. And then did you guys eventually move, or did you stay there your whole life?
I stayed there until, I'll just add to what you were just saying, first of
Yeah.
all. Yeah, my mom, like, although she wasn't into organized sports, she took us cross country skiing almost every day after school when we were kids, because we loved it. And they're about a lifelong love for physical activity and the outdoors. So I truly believe in exposing kids to a huge amount of different types of activities. And if they love it, they love it. If they don't, we move on. But I think just playing, just going out and trying stuff, having badminton rackets around, like having that, I actually thrived more on unorganized sports, non-organized sports, than I did on, like, I liked going to practice and stuff. I was that kid, but I really loved just playing anything and having the ability just to go outside and play anything. So, and I liked the break from hockey. So once the season was done, I loved that I had 4 months off as a kid to play anything. And my dad was huge on that he didn't want to put me in summer organized sports, because he wanted to develop a whole athlete, like a child that has multiple skills, to develop the athlete rather than just the hockey player. So I felt like that helped me to be adaptive to other sports, like to be decent at basketball because I was exposed to it, to be good at cycling and all these other sports. But anyways, no, we lived in this small town until I was 16. And then I actually was offered a scholarship to a girls' private school in downtown Toronto. And so that's when I moved to Southern Ontario at the age of 15, 16.
Yeah, because a lot of these kids, probably you have to make a decision at some point where there's that threshold of, I'm only going to be able to go so far with this here. And then if we're really going to try to make this work, something is going to have to change. And that would come with, obviously, maybe you going off on your own, or the family having to relocate themselves. There's a financial burden. There could be all kinds of different issues. So how was that on your family when you left home at 16? Because even I know my sister left to go overseas to Belgium just as an exchange student, but that changed the dynamic of the family. Just having my older sister away in our teenage years, then it was like, oh, what does our family look like without that person there?
Mhm. Yeah, that's very interesting. So with my two older sisters, they flew the coop early because they came to Southern Ontario to go to university. So I was the last one there, and I remember it was like we were thinking about it, like what are we going to do? Because I played boys hockey all my life, played midget hockey, and then once we got to midget level, I practiced with teams, AAA teams in Sault Ste. Marie. But then on the weekends, I would go to Sudbury, which was 3 hours away, to play on a girls' team, just so that I could get into tournaments in Toronto and play, because I knew I wouldn't get a scholarship if I was playing boys hockey. That's how it was back then. And so, so going, it was a godsend and an answer to prayer that we actually got a phone call out of the blue from this girls' private school saying that they would pay my whole way to be in boarding for 3 or 4 years, flipping the entire bill, and for me to be able to stay there, do track and field, compete for them in track and field, and compete on their women's hockey team. And so I then signed a deal with the Toronto Arrows, which was more just saying that I was coming to play for them, and that was in the National Women's Hockey League. So that was the beginning of me coming down to Toronto and playing in a bigger league, in a women's only league. So yeah, it was serendipitous, really. It was just all the stars aligned right at the right time to allow that move to happen. And then my parents subsequently moved to Southern Ontario, back to where an area that they were from, so that they were closer to all three of us.
Awesome. Now, as a kid, you're talking about playing with the boys. I would love your impression as a young person with coaching. How did your coaches get the best performance out of you while still allowing you to love the sport? Because there could be a difference, right? You could get a lot of performance out of somebody and they might just do it, they might grind it out, and they may not love it. And eventually they might say, forget this, I'm done with this. But there is this magic of how do I get the most out of a kid and, create this environment that helps them thrive as well. So what did you have coaches that were like that had that great balance for you?
As a child, I didn't, but I felt like, well, the main person who was my coach in the early days was my dad. And I would say that he had the most positive and negative impact on me as a young child. That being a girl playing in a boys' league, it was at a time where girls shouldn't be playing. And this wasn't that long ago. This was like in the 80s, 90s. And so it was very evident that they didn't want me there. I was just good enough to play there. So, like obviously I have a different change room, but there wasn't this interaction of I had friends on the team that I could talk to. The boys didn't talk to me. The coaches hardly talked to me. I was there to play and I had to be on every game. Otherwise, there would be talk. And so the biggest coach for me was my dad. And even though he wasn't directly my coach all the time, he had the most impact on me. And he had positive because I trusted him. I knew what he was saying. He would encourage me, but he would also tell me what I was doing wrong. And for me, I like a coach that shoots from the hip, like be transparent and clear and communicate what I'm doing well and what I'm not doing well so I can improve on that. I was that type of kid. Just tell me what I'm not doing well. What's the gap for me to play on the first line and help me to work on it so I can get there. Right. So that to me was huge. So my dad did that for me. And then it was also the trust piece for me was huge. So I trusted my dad because what he said was actually, I could see that it was true. Yes, I do need to work on that. Okay, I get it. So that trust piece as a young child and having clear lines of communication, not just always encouragement, not just always negative stuff, but a fine balance between the two was huge for me. And I was really a hard worker. Like I thrived on hard practices and I needed risk and challenge. So a coach that would give me challenges in practice and risk in games because I was known as a clutch player, the player that could make a difference in stressful situations. So I thrived on stressful situations. And so I wanted that risk. So when a coach allowed me, said, Logan, you're up, get on the ice. I was excited, like, give me this chance to prove myself because I felt like I was always proving myself on a day-to-day basis or the practices in boys sport that I could handle that stress as a young kid. And so my dad was always about, okay, I believe you're good enough. You have the skill level. I'll give you opportunity. I'll get you into practice with boys AAA teams. So you're always continuing to improve. I'll talk, get you into tournaments, but the proof is in the pudding, Heather. Like you need to perform and you need to be ready. So I took on that challenge, even if I was unaware of it as a young kid, because I knew I had to perform and I had to be on my game to be in a boys league. So I wouldn't say it was super fun playing boys hockey when I was a kid, but I loved hockey. And I don't know if I think a lot of kids wouldn't be able to put up with it because it was hard. It was not fun. I didn't have any friends on the teams. It was very negative, but I was there to play and I was thankful for the opportunity. And that's all there was. So, and the boys were making me better. So to me, that was fine.
Right. Sounds like pressure for sure. And then it's almost an unrational pressure because that same kind of expectation wouldn't be on most of those boys because it was almost like if you messed up, that's kind of like how we can get her out of here. So I remember President Barack Obama saying there was no room for error in the White House because I was representing. And if I did anything to have a misstep, then that would have collapsed the entire image of what we were trying to change. And not to put gender in the same category as race, but what you're talking about is almost saying that if I wanted to be in this group that did not want me, I had to do everything in my power to make them realize that I was, capable of being there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. It doesn't sound fun. And like the point of what we're trying to do now is to make sport competitive as well as enjoyable, and then also create that environment for the ability to learn and to develop. So you're an interesting category because you did develop and you did thrive in one capacity, but then how was your mental health through all of that?
Funny enough, I thought it was like I was so intrinsically motivated. Like I was a kid that I just knew it was like that, so it didn't really bother me.
Okay.
And I was there because I loved it and I knew I was good at it, hockey. So it wasn't like I was humbly confident and I don't know, it didn't bother me that much. What got me was my dad, like when he was negative to me or, like he was my coach for a while and it just didn't work out. Like I would cry at practices because he was hard on me too. Right. And so, he got out of the coaching, but then up on the stands, like I knew when I was playing well or I wasn't, and some silent treatment after the games. It was the focus on the goal scoring, that a good game was based on points. Like how many goals did you score? And I would argue with him being like, I worked my butt off. I was in good position. I was like, basically my plus minus was excellent. And yeah, I didn't score any goals, but the focus was goal centered and we always collided on that. And I found deep down inside, I would sometimes be angry, which would fuel my fire for the next game, but it was more because of my dad, not because of the coaches, right? So it was my mental health from the coach and dynamics with the players. I found it was fine. Like I could handle it. I was just like, whatever, I know what to expect. It was more the interaction with my dad, who was the main influence that, there's positive and negatives, but that's what got me the most, I think.
So if you could offer advice, because most youth sport coaches are parents, if you could offer a youth sport coach who is coaching their child, what would you say to them?
I would say that you really need to get to know, take the time to get to know your child and what motivates them and, develop some goals with them and, focus, do the simple sandwich effect where you're focusing on some positive, you have something that they need to improve and then focus on a positive so that, you're clear with them that yes, you have things to improve on, but you're good at these things. So let's keep working and developing you as an athlete and let's have a lot of fun while we're doing it and enjoy it. And just because my dad was so much points based. And I really think parents should take more of the plus minus, like working on that plus minus, especially from a sports standpoint. I think that's more important down the road for decision making and selection rather than just goal scores, like goals. Like goals are great, but if your line is developing and your defensemen are scoring and you're on the ice when there's positive things happening, I think that should be more of the focus. And then it takes the onus off of you and more as working together as a team.
Nice. I like that. Let's move towards what happened with you transitioning. So eventually you played on the Canadian national hockey team, but then you had to switch into cycling. And I heard the rumor that cycling was your way of conditioning or preparing for hockey. And then it just turned into this other pathway. You want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, sure. So I was at a time where I was kind of on the bubble with the national team program. And I was pretty discouraged with the state of selection. And I was really not on the side of the politics. And I was really discouraged because all my life I was focused on the end product, which, as a child, I never saw professional women sport. So I thought the Olympics was the highest attainment for women. So for hockey, my goal from a little child was the Olympics. And so I was the captain of the junior national hockey team. So I played on the under 22 from age 18 to 22. And when I was 22, I was named the captain of the team. And we played at the European Air Canada Cup. And I was the tournament MVP. And it was great. It was awesome. It was my favorite year of hockey. And then after that, there were some, differences between coaches and selection and everything. You know how it is playing at that level and in a more subjective based sport. And so I wasn't on the side of that. So I was very, very frustrated. And so I decided, one of my friends was like, you cycle every summer, you do some local races and do triathlon to keep in shape. Why don't you come to road cycling national championships this year? And that was in 2008. And so I said, what the heck, let's do it. Like, I kind of need a break from hockey. So I went and I came fourth, and I beat some of the girls that were going to the Olympics that summer. And so after the race, and I was like a hockey player on a bike. Like I knew how to work hard. And I think that's what got me through so many times in my life. And I had mental toughness. And so it was a huge surprise. And the national team coach came to me afterwards and said, hey, do you want to come as a support rider for our 4 Olympic girls who are going to the Olympics this summer in a tour of Turgen, which is in Germany. And we leave in 2 weeks. I said, me? Are you kidding me? Like me? And so I said, sure, I have a steel bike. Like I've never done a 6-day stage race in the mountains in Germany, but sure, I'm a good teammate. Like that's one thing that I've had going for me, that I'm a role player and I really believe in cooperation and accepting your role. So I said, sure. So I went, and that was one of the biggest whoa moments of my life, because one, I saw that women's cycling is actually professional, that there is a sport that can be professional for women. And I saw just how much culture is around cycling in Europe. I always heard of it, and I dreamed of going to the Tour de France when I was a kid. Like I loved my bike. I was that type of kid. And I always pretended I was in the tour and had a yellow jersey and stuff. And so this was like a dream come true, really. And so it was so hard. Like I thought I was going to die, but I played my role well. And some races, like I had to hammer into the climbs for the hill climber on our team. And some days I would end up almost being last, but I had my role to play and I played it. And it was so hard. And it took me probably like 2 months to recover from that trip. And I was in the lab because I was doing my Ph.D. at the time. And I got a phone call out of the blue, and they're like, is this Heather Logan? I said, yes. And they're like, this is the director of Colavita Women's Pro Cycling. And we saw you racing at Turgen, and we heard great things about you. We don't know you from Adam, but we'd like to offer you a pro contract with our professional team for the next season. And I said, what? Like, this is crazy. And so I signed, like Colavita at the time was in the top 3 in the world, women's UCI pro cycling teams. And so they offered me a contract. And I accepted it, obviously, because I never got paid to play sport before in my life. So this was huge. And so that's how it started. So that was in September. And then that season I played hockey in the National Women's Hockey League with the Toronto Arrows. But I was also had to train full time because I was preparing for my first season as a pro cyclist. So in January was our first team camp in California in Napa Valley at the Sutter Homes Trinchero Estates, which was the big sponsor of our team. And it was unbelievable. Like it was night and day difference than hockey. And like I played at the highest level for women's hockey in Canada and in the world. And it was nothing like cycling. Like, and you don't even think of cycling as being professional, but in the States and in Europe, like you can make a career out of it, which was very exciting. And so from there, I played that season of hockey, and I couldn't fully let it go because I just loved it. And it was something that was rooted in me since I was 3. And so I played the next season, but I basically part-time, and then I was full-time cyclist. Yeah, that first season of cycling in 2009, I went to World Championships. I did all the European calendar. Yeah, it was so hard. It was so over my head, but it was amazing. And I think that's what I brought with me from hockey, is that I realized very early that you have to be a good role player on a team. And cycling is very much a team-based sport. And it's not always about you. Like some days it's going to be, you'll be the star, and other days you're not. And you just got to deal with it and celebrate your teammates and other people's successes. Otherwise, you're just going to be a grumpy, bitter athlete, an envious person. You're not going to go very far. So that's one thing that I've always had instilled with me as a child. And so it made me a decent teammate because I could celebrate my friends without being envious because I knew my time was coming too. And so cycling is very much like that. In that first season, I was a domestique, which means like servant. So I basically did anything I was asked, go get water bottles, but you have to be strong to be a domestique, you know, like sacrifice your own race up the road so that your team leader can win the race. And they get the accolades, just like Lance Armstrong did. But you know, you are still part of that team. So it was really exciting. Like cycling was a whole different world. It was very cool that it actually was professional.
Yeah, I would just want to share this story because it sounds a little bit relatable, not at the same level by any means, but I had done 4 years of soccer in the NCAA, and I had 1 year of eligibility left. And the tennis coach comes down to the soccer office in a panic, and I'm the grad assistant now. I'm the assistant coach for the women's soccer team. And he's like, "Oh my God, goodness, there's this athlete from Colombia. She's not able to come. I don't know what I'm going to do," because same as what you're talking about, it was team based for a lot of the tournaments. And so he was just like, who are my athletes? Who still has eligibility? He's like, "I will teach you how to play tennis." And so over the winter, we're like in the racquetball court, just trying to learn from scratch because like I could hold my own maybe in different sports, but tennis, it was, there's a lot of technique to it. So the very first tournament we go to is called something like the biggest tournament on the Northeast coast or something like that. And exactly what you're saying is like I was the sacrificial lamb where I had to stay in the matches just as long as possible so that the good girls could win. And there's this one girl I'll always remember. I lost very quickly in the first match, and she came over to me and she's like, "Okay, I know that you're not very good, but I know at least." She was trying to pep talk me. She's like, "You just have to extend the match as long as possible and give me a chance to win as quickly as possible." So that was my role. It was just run and run and run and run and look like a fool because these girls on the other side of the court, they were just like, "So we know that we know that you like are probably an athlete, but tennis is probably not your sport." And it's like, no, yeah, that's totally accurate. And my role here is just to fulfill this team in terms of numbers. And I'm just going to do my part. And the thing that was the worst for me was they gave me leftover clothes. So they had these super cute tennis skirts and these awesome shoes. And I had like the white shorts and then this really bad pair of shoes that I had to wear. And I was just like, okay, so I look frumpy and I'm really bad, but this is what I got to do. So
That's amazing. Good for you. That is really hard to do. Good for you. That's exciting.
but now it's really enjoyable because I've got a couple of skills, and now as an adult, I can pick up a racket and I can hit around a little bit. So that was great. Okay, I'm loving this conversation so much. I want to move on because you've got so much expertise in hydration and some super cool things that were highlighted from the Olympics just came up in terms of heat and just the performance ability of athletes in these conditions. And it was just kind of like, how can we throw these athletes under the bus like this? They chose the hottest time of the year in Tokyo, probably for ratings, and maybe you can give me insight into that. And the conditions, they changed it for endurance athletes to go a little bit further north so that it could be a little bit cooler for some of them. But I just wrote down some quotes from what one of the athletes had said. He said, this was Russia's Daniil Medvedev. And he said, "I can finish the match, but I can die." He told the umpire, "If I die, are you going to be responsible?" And this is from The Guardian. And that article was written on August 5th this year, 2021. And so when we look at this kind of stuff, and especially with youth sport, who's responsible for these kinds of conditions? We need to put our athletes in the best positions for performance and also safety. So you want to expand on that? Like what can we do as coaches and parents when these conditions are not ideal for training or even competing?
Yeah, I would say that at the Olympic level, like we knew the conditions of Tokyo. You can look historically at the conditions in July and August there. So I don't think there's really any excuse. We knew what we were preparing for, and we have the science to be able to acclimate or acclimatize athletes to prepare for those environments. Like one of the main things I did is as a cyclist, like races are in the rain. Like whatever you wake up to, they're not going to delay a race because it's raining. You have to learn how to race in the rain and ride corners in the rain and avoid the white paint so you don't crash. Like I knew for the Olympians, and they were really saying, oh, these conditions are so hot, so hot, so hot, which they were. But we have lots of strategies. We've been working with these athletes for 4 years and preparing them for how to deal with the heat. So yes, tennis matches can last a long time. It's true. Having more breaks in between where they can actually do some mid-cooling strategies would be effective, and ensuring that they have time to hydrate, giving them more time out just to actually cool themselves. So there are strategies, certainly for any professional and Olympic-based athlete, we can get them ready and acclimate them to the environment. So I feel with the Olympics, like it's just, we knew about it. So it's part of your preparation is the environmental preparation. As for youth, and I know you sent me a lot of information that was so good about football and the training camps, and how there are quite a few deaths each year, like from athletes training in the heat, especially coming to a training camp. So one of the main issues there is the fact that athletes are coming to a hot training camp after being off. So their fitness level may not be at the highest. They may be carrying around a little bit extra body mass that they're hoping to work off during the season or during the, the pre-competition preparation phase. And so all these and then it's really, really hot. Right. So, and then some coaches still believe in the archaic theories that, drinking water makes you weak. So they don't allow for accommodations to hot environments. So all of these multiple factors do compound, and it does lead to heat exhaustion. And if the coach isn't reading the signs and symptoms of your athletes, then it can lead to severe issues. So yeah, like water is a good thing. Our blood is composed of mostly water in our plasma volume. Like we have to allow kids to drink if we want quality out of them in an hour, 2 hour session. And allowing for more breaks, using water to cool yourself, always bringing 2 water bottles, one that's more a thermos that can keep fluid cold. The other one may not be, but one that you can douse on yourself to do cooling, put it on your hands, put it on your face and the back of your neck. All these, like having fans, providing more strategies, using menthol, a mouth rinse, like even putting back a piece of gum that has that cooling effect can trick your brain to make you think that you're cool. So that thermal perception is really important. So there are lots of strategies that we can put in place to mitigate the compounding effects of heat, or shorten the duration of your practices and work on the quality, right? Or just on strategy or different things. But as for those training camps, it's multiple factors, and it's sad. I think the coaches should take ownership of that and accommodate for more breaks in training, and realize that your athletes are coming in. They might not be acclimatized or acclimated to the environment. So we have to be mindful of that.
Yeah, I studied traditional Chinese medicine, and I want to just go back to what you said because I've never thought about it that way. We studied that there were cooling and warming herbs and also cooling and warming foods. And exactly what you're saying, mint is a cooling herb. And so that's really neat. So you could just create your own cooling elements within your water, or watermelon, or those kinds of things. And I never thought about that. That's cool. So menthol, you mentioned the mouthwash.
Yeah, so some of my research is around this new area, this new potential ergogenic or nutritional ergogenic, which is supplementing or putting menthol as a mouth rinse. So there's been lots of research to show that you can use a carbohydrate mouth rinse where you swirl around in your mouth and you spit it out. You don't even have to swallow it. And what it does, it activates reward centers in your brain, and it gives you the perception that you're not as tired as you are. So it's like tricking the brain. So we've been playing around a lot with menthol, and we've published on this with some of my grad students to use menthol swirling. So you have it in your mouth for 5 to 10 seconds and you spit it out. And it's been shown to alter your rating of perceived exertion, how hard you think the activity you're doing is. So it's this thermal perception. So you actually think that you're not as hot as you are. And so your core temperature may be high, but we're playing around with another strategy to try to make you feel that you're not as hot as you are. So this could be helpful if you don't have very much time on the sidelines for tennis, for beach volleyball, whatever it may be, swirling with menthol, doing your physical cooling, but also using this nutritional potential ergogenic to help make you feel cool, tricking the brain.
Very cool. One of the things that you also wanted to go back to was body mass. And I listened to your conversation with Ann Guzman on her podcast, and she asked a question about whether there was a difference between gender and hydration. And you said it was mostly body mass. Do you want to talk about that? So, like, if you had a football team, so the statistics that we were talking about from the articles with kids actually dying in football training, from 1995 to 2020, 51 high school football players in the United States died from heat stroke during football-related activity. This is according to the University of North Carolina's National Center for Catastrophic Sport Injury Research. And so when you've got a football team, you've got all kinds of body types. So if a coach is running a training session, how might they be able to adapt based on a varying level of athlete?
Yeah, so I guess I would say that it's more body mass does make a difference, because body surface area you may have more active or inactive sweat glands depending. So there is a difference. There is a sex-based difference in the number of active sweat glands. So like on the feet of women, there's evidence has shown that there's more active sweat glands. So that's a site that we can use to more thoroughly thermoregulate. So it's more cross-sectional area. And then also when it comes to lean body mass. So lean body mass is metabolically active, such that we create more heat. If those muscles are engaged, we're creating heat. So when we're breaking down food to our energy currency within the cell, we're only 20% efficient. Like 20% of the food we eat goes to energy, while the rest is lost as heat. So the more muscle mass that you're engaging in an exercise session, the more metabolic heat you're producing. So then your body has a little bit of a problem, that we have our thermostat that's at 37 degrees Celsius. It's very analogous to our home thermostat, where you set it at 20 degrees in your house that's pleasant for living. And we have these mechanisms, your air conditioner and your furnace, that kick on when we deviate from that in our body. And that home thermostat was designed off of how our body functions, that we have 37 degrees that is optimal for enzymatic and protein function. And when we go too high, we hit our sweat threshold. It activates our internal cooling system, which is the sweat response, right? And then if we drop too low, we have involuntary shivering to generate heat through involuntary muscle activation. So really, it's cross-sectional area, as well as the engagement of lean body mass. So yeah, body mass you have to move that weight, and therefore you have to activate more muscle, and therefore you probably will produce more heat.
And then the humidity piece is also what they were talking about at the Olympics, that the high humidity, the two combinations that are ideal for the cooling would be sweating and then evaporation. So what happens if the humidity is too high?
Yeah, that's actually the heat and humidity combined is a real recipe for heat exhaustion. And it's because we get the cooling effect. So like I just mentioned, with exercise, we increase our core temperature. And then when our core temperature, we create this gradient from our core to our skin temperature, and that drives blood flow to our skin. And so once we get blood flow to our skin through our sweat glands, we create sweat, we start to sweat. And through the evaporation of the sweat off our skin surface, we feel cool. So we can maintain that gradient between our core temperature and the skin to allow continuous skin blood flow to get rid of the sweat and therefore allow for the evaporation. However, if humidity is really high and the environment is already almost fully saturated with fluid, with water in the air, then we don't have evaporative cooling. So that poses a problem because now we can't maintain that temperature gradient from the core to the skin. And so we can't get rid of the heat. And so core temperature rises until you get to about 39 degrees, where you start to see physical and mental or cognitive impairments as a result of being too hot. And the brain can only get too hot before it starts to say, okay, we need to slow down, stop contracting, stop moving so fast. Otherwise, we're going to have a catastrophic, problem here. We're going to pass, and eventually it will lead you to pass out as a protection mechanism. So yeah, high heat, high humidity is worse. So what I always suggest is wick off, have a towel so you can wipe it off at least, but you have to do more skin cooling. So coming to a competition wearing a cooling vest is huge. So your core temperature is lower. Using water to cool your skin. You can also use any topical cooling agents like menthol. The rub has some evidence to suggest that can help as well, or more in your perception of being hot. But certainly humidity is a recipe for overheating, certainly.
Yeah. And so you said that your Canadian athletes heading over to Tokyo, they had the heads up. They would have had a plan in place. They would have been able to acclimatize properly. Now let's talk about a youth sports team that maybe is going down to Florida, for instance, from a cooler state or province. What would you say to a sport coach so that their team could prepare for that acclimatization and then be able to perform well once they're there?
So if you're doing it in like the winter in Canada and you're going down to try to get a training camp in, there's not much you can do. Like when I was cycling, I would make a heat chamber in my bathroom that was high humidity and cycle in there just to prepare for some of the races that I had to go to in the wintertime, because I trained on my rollers basically all winter in Canada and then went down to hot events. So I always say, you have to take that into account when you're planning your week or 2 weeks of training, that you need to account for more rest time and you need to be more perceptive of how your athletes are doing. Right. So obviously structured more breaks, hydration breaks. You can very easily check your hydration of your athletes by doing a pre and post body mass weight. So you weigh them in their minimal clothing beforehand, and then weigh them after the practice. You add in, and that's in kilograms, you add in the amount of fluid they took in. So you have to figure out whether they drank a liter or 500 milliliters, whatever it is. You add that on in liters and subtract any urine volume. And then you get their sweat loss for that entire session. And then if you divide that by the time of the session, you can get their sweat rate. So how much that athlete sweats per hour, per half an hour, whatever it is. And then obviously you can't, like, drinking to maintain fluid balance is extremely hard. It's almost impossible. Like, you're constantly drinking, especially if you have a sweat rate of 2 liters an hour. You would have to drink 2 liters an hour. And then, you have to train the gut to be able to handle that much fluid. So I always say, try to minimize your sweat losses to less than 2% body mass loss. So you can do the calculations, and that's an easy way to track how much body mass they're losing from sweat in a given session. And then from a recovery standpoint, the literature is quite consistent in saying that you should replace 150% of your body mass losses. So say you lost a liter, that means in the recovery after, you would drink 1.5 liters to replace.
Straight water, or are you adding in anything with that recovery?
It depends on the person. Like, if you're an athlete who has chalk lines, white chalk lines on their jerseys, whatever it is, you may have a high sweat sodium concentration, and you may want to supplement with sodium, or just make sure that the meal that you're going back to has a little bit of table salt on it, or sea salt or something to that effect. Yeah, so there's 2 components to the sweating. It's sweat electrolyte loss and then the sweat loss. And so some people, and it's so individually variable, and that's why I do a lot of individual testing, especially with my work with my Ph.D. I tested a lot of NHL NBA and Major League Soccer players in developing their own customized hydration plan, because essentially someone could have a high sweat loss of 3 liters an hour, but have low sweat sodium. So it doesn't necessarily have a problem with cramping or anything to that effect. While someone else could have high sweat loss and high sweat sodium loss, which may predispose them to higher cramping. Right. And, or the opposite, low sweat rate, but high sweat sodium. So it really depends. And so you have to customize and test this. But for a coach who doesn't have that, it's easy to hire out to someone to get that done. It's relatively cheap, but provide very meaningful data to your athlete. Because my whole thing is that, hydration is something that you can relatively control as an athlete. And it's something that you just check off that you have a hydration plan in effect, because it can have significant detriments to your performance if you're not dialing that in and being aware of it. So to me, it's like just something that was on my preparation list that I knew I had to have checked off, besides nutrition and everything else. So you could, for the coach, just make sure to tell the athletes, check their urine and their morning urine, see if it's relatively clear. If it's not, you should definitely start drinking as soon as you wake up. Better sip than have big chugs to prevent that acute diuresis. And also in the 90 minutes before practice, make sure you drink 500 milliliters of fluid.
Okay, that is great to know. And one of the things that you said with your other interview with Anne was, I think this will hit home as well with coaches, the amount of time that your performance would start to go down. I think you said there was like a 30-minute where almost if you weren't properly hydrated at that 30-minute mark, then all of a sudden we're going to see a drop off in performance. Is that right?
Yeah, so some of my research has shown that even at moderate intensity cycling, indoors in an air-conditioned facility, at the 30-minute mark, we started to see higher heart rates, higher core temperatures, and higher rating of perceived exertion, how hard you perceive your working to be. So, and that was only at 1% dehydrated. So that's not that much. That can be 500 milliliters over an hour, right? So it's not that much, but we do see substantial changes, because your heart has to work harder when it has less blood volume, because when you sweat, you're losing the sweat. That fluid is coming directly from your blood volume. So the more you sweat without replacing it, you're actually taking away blood volume. So now your heart has to work harder to pump around the same or a lower volume. And that's why we see the cardiovascular drift. We see heart rate go up over time when someone isn't hydrating as well. Now, in like an hour of exercise, you can get away with it. But if you're having 2 sessions a day, you can compound it. If you're having a 2-hour, 3-hour practice, like that's where you should dial that stuff in. But for a 1-hour session, if the person's arriving hydrated, they drank 500 milliliters in the hour before, they can get away with not drinking very much in that hour session. It's just they have to focus on making sure that they drink afterwards.
Yeah. So what we're seeing right now is kids are wearing masks at school, depending on where you live. And so maybe having those hydration times at school is limited. And then kids are showing up for practices right after. I mean, yesterday I picked up my son right from school, went right to the arena. And so I think this is going to be really important for everybody, just to kind of consider that other piece that needs to go in, not just to say like that kid is tired from being at school all day, but then also what does their nutrition look? And especially if there's one thing that we can hone in on, it could just be a very simple thing of drinking.
Yeah, definitely. Because like if you don't have enough, like my kids are notorious for that. I always ask them, did you drink enough? And I check their bottles when they get home from school. Like, you didn't drink all day. That's probably why you're tired. You don't need necessarily a snack, even though I give them a healthy snack. They probably need to drink their water. And it is with the masks, like it prevents you from being able to come down and take a drink. So yeah, definitely. So one of the things in the research that's quite obvious is that 50% of even NBA players back in 95, between 95 and 2000, it may have changed now, but we're arriving to competitions dehydrated. That's 50%. So they're already coming, potentially compromising their own mental and physical performance as a result of not properly preparing. So that's one thing I always say is that's 500 milliliters 90 minutes before. Make sure that you're arriving hydrated at least. So you set your body up for the best success during the practice, and you don't have a compromised thermoregulatory system as a result of something that you didn't do before arriving. So that could be something on the way to practice that they don't guzzle it because they'll just have to go pee, but you sip on it and allow for it to be absorbed and not cause, overload the kidneys.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, the conditioning piece and the recovery is huge. And when I see some practices, sometimes coaches will use conditioning or physical ways of movement as punishment. So you would have wind sprints, or you would have push ups, or you would have whatever. And there's what I'm concerned about, and I've addressed it a couple times, and I just like to get different people's opinion on that. But from a hydration perspective, if we are using conditioning as punishment and then also not hydrating properly in the effort to make kids focus and perform better, maybe they messed up and the coach is fed up and they're like, go do this and then come back. How does that play out from a standpoint of whether they will be able to get back into focus if there's other elements that might actually be off?
Yeah, that I find that pretty massive. Like, to me, it's like even as simple as getting the blood test of your kids every year. Because if the internal physiology isn't proper, you're not going to have the adaptations to the training. So it's similar to hydration. Like, if you're forcing physical activity on someone, that it may be just all mental at that point, right? Because at the end of the practice, if they haven't done something right, to me, there's no physical benefit. If they're just going through the motions, they're not getting the quality movement patterns, the quality intensity isn't there because they're already fatigued, they're dehydrated. So it's more like just going through the mental, like, I just have to do this because I'm forced to do it. And it may develop some toughness, I'm not sure. But from a physiological standpoint, to me, I'm all about movement quality and intensity and having purposeful movements and training smart, not just more is better. I don't believe in that philosophy. So I am a huge believer in ensuring that the internal environment is set to get the most out of the external training load. Because if nutrition and your blood biomarkers and hydration isn't in check, then you're not going to get you're not going to get the quality out of the training, which is going to lead to the stress that the body needs to adapt in a positive way. And so, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of that, but I would have to, I don't know, there's always a time for something. Like, if the kids aren't doing effort, and then I don't know, I think there's a different way to go about it, but it depends on the context, obviously.
Yeah, and I think the context definitely does play in, and then also the personality of the kids as well, and then maybe the expectations. There was one guest that I had on, and he was just very clear about his expectations from the beginning. And he said, so if they weren't meeting that and the team goals, then we would have a conversation about that and kind of regroup. And so, yeah, I think there's definitely lots of different tools that can be used in order to get the most out of kids. And as you said, from sharing your story, you were saying that some certain things didn't really affect you in a negative way because your ability to perform and want to do drills and want to work hard was already there. So it's a matter of trying to figure out, oh, how do I get that out of this kid who might be different from this kid? And maybe the response of, you know, going through sprints isn't actually what that kid is going to need. And so it's a loaded question. I recognize that.
I do believe that, like, I was the type of athlete that would be frustrated though if other people weren't putting in effort.
Me
Like
too.
I did. And so for me, and if this is a coach situation where this was reoccurring, I would probably have the athlete who works the hardest tell them and try to motivate their teammates and say, we're all in this together. Like, you need to be pulling your weight. Like, I felt like I was more responsive to a teammate saying that than hearing it from the coach yelling it all the time. So it depends on how the coach approaches it, but it could be like, okay, so how are you talking to the kid who always works hard? Like, how do you feel when these athletes are goofing around and not doing this, when we're part of a team and they're going to have the same playing time as you, essentially? Like, there's a lot of things, but yeah, I really got frustrated with not kids that didn't cooperate and play a role and were selfish. And I really got frustrated with people who didn't put in an effort and focused when we were at practice. So yeah, like, I think if the expectations are clear, then there certainly needs to be some sort of I don't know if it's certainly not a consequence, but there needs to be certainly some standards in place with expectations.
Yeah, for sure. Some of their coaches might be with kids that might be getting into different party situations with alcohol. Do you want to talk about alcohol and hydration at all?
Sure. So alcohol is a diuretic. So when you drink a lot, it does make you actually more dehydrated. So a diuretic means it just increases urine loss without being absorbed in your body. Obviously, there's lots of negative consequences to alcohol use. You certainly do not want to have it anywhere near competition. It will affect your quality of training the day after. So you have to be, if you're going to use alcohol, you have to be strategic. And moderation is the key, right? And as well as if you are having alcohol, have the salty peanuts that go along with it to help you absorb some of the fluid. And it will actually help you prevent as much of a hangover the next day. So it essentially prevents the acute diuresis because you're giving yourself sodium chloride to help to hold on to some of the fluid. Yeah, I think that's all I'll say on that, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Hopefully the ones that are listening have kids that are young enough that aren't drinking, but it is a reality. We've got high school kids that are going to parties on the weekend and their coaches are expecting them to perform just like everybody else. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that I don't want to ignore the fact that everybody's living these perfect lives because ultimately they're not, they're making choices. And so for a young person to recognize that their choices on the weekend will negatively affect their ability to do the thing that they love at their best, I think that's something that it should definitely be addressed because we can't ignore that kids are kids and they're going to be experimenting with all kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, bang on. Totally agree. Especially you're letting down your teammates if they're coming to practice and they're, compromised performance, then it affects everyone. So from a team standpoint, it's really like it's almost being a little bit selfish. So I think that discussion certainly needs to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I don't want to take up any of your time because you have lots going on. So I just wanted to ask you a couple of closing questions. If you could offer one piece of advice for youth sport coaches, what would you tell them?
This is hard. And you gave me this question earlier, and I have a couple things. I don't know if it would be one piece, but I really believe in taking the time to find out what motivates each athlete, like find out what their why is, and developing an individual plan for each athlete, which includes a proper needs and gap analysis. So finding out, like if this is an athlete that actually wants to go on, find out what their gaps are compared to competitors of their age, of their sex, that are competing at the highest level, and work to develop a plan to mitigate that gap. I think is huge. I think coaches should try to avoid the cookie cutter approach that one size fits all for a training plan, because I find the child and youth coaches have the biggest impact on molding the future athlete. And so I really believe that you need to train them smart and develop good training principles and movement patterns at a young age. So don't avoid if you can, like sometimes in teams where you have big team, you can't get to every athlete. I think you should make time. If you're taking on the responsibility of being a coach, you need to make time and set aside time to get to know each athlete and develop a plan that's customized to them. I also think one low-hanging piece is to calibrate your anticipated exertion for a training session to the kid's actual perceived exertion. So, and this is really important because a coach could come with a practice that they believe is super hard, but then the athletes do it and they're like, that wasn't so hard, right? So there's a disconnect. And so the coach has this, they're monitoring their training load, training intensity and volume, but it's what they think. It's not actually what the athletes are getting. And so making sure that you calibrate, and this is as simple as, okay, this is my anticipated rating of perceived exertion from me, the coach. And then I get the athletes to write theirs down after. And you do this calibration method to ensure that what you're prescribing is actually what they feel it is. Because I've seen this notoriously in youth-based sports, is that there's a monotony of training, that every training session ends up being the same intensity, same volume. Well, volume can change, but same intensity, same load. and internal stress. So you see this plateau in performance or only a small climb in athlete performance. And you have to come back and question your training prescription. Are you providing enough of a stress to actually see the cells change? And if you're not, then you need to change something. And it could be as easy as calibrating what you think you're giving them to what they actually are perceiving and have as an internal load marker. So I think that is huge. And I think it's missing a lot because we have this awesome plan and we give it to our athletes, but we don't know how they're internally responding. And so it's just a matter of asking them, how hard was that session for you? And then you just do a calibration exercise. It might take a month to gather that feedback, but then you say, hey, you know what? We're off. We need to change this because what they're thinking is hard is actually a medium workout for me. And then I'm training them hard the next day. And so, for your micro planning and mesocycle planning, you need to take that into consideration. And then the last thing I think it's really important to develop, there's more to life than just sports. So it's taking the time to talk about character development when you have the athlete, right? Because you might be the only influential person, but your coach is a huge influence in your life. By making sure you're developing not just the athlete, but you're developing the good character, and you're talking about the pieces that you're bringing with you. Like, it's all about cooperation, teamwork. Why is that important? Like, developing good, thankful, and good quality people, humans, I think is also important.
I love that. And I think what you were talking about there with recalibration was also something that hit me, was the ego of the coach that might be thrown off a bit, because if you are thinking that you're doing what you think is best, and then it's not, you're almost having to check in with yourself too, and be okay with change and be okay with, adapting on the fly. I've been in different sessions, exactly what you're talking about. You show up, you have a plan. And my university coach, he said the same thing. And he said, you know what? They just didn't want to do that. And it was a matter of just recognizing, he said, know who you're coaching. And you're saying the exact same thing. You have to figure out what that kid is all about. And then also be able to tap into something so that you're able to change yourself, because everybody isn't going to respond the same way to how you are. And then figure out how you have this awesome relationship that just builds and grows. So I love that. That was a great answer. I have two more though. So if you could offer the pieces of advice to the athletes now, what would you say to them?
I would say certainly enjoy the moment, like have fun, both on the journey of sport, and don't be too focused on the outcome. Because I felt like in my hockey career, I was so focused on the Olympics, and that happens every 4 years. And, that might not be in the plan, but what I gathered from the entire journey was amazing. And so try your best in every practice, every competition, focus on the journey and self-improvement, and don't always focus on the outcome. And then I would also say to work on your mental toughness too, because when you get to an elite level, especially when you're competing internationally or at world championships, we've all done our physical prep. Everyone is almost the same. It's more who's the mental toughness that creates that edge. So I always say, find out those keywords that really motivate you, that you can just say to refocus, activate you, motivate you. So for example, one of them, even on my bike, was get the puck. And for me, it was just get on top of my gears, to get over that climb, get the puck. Because when I was a kid, my dad would always say, get the puck, Heather, go get it, go get it. And I was like a dog after a ball, I would just burn towards it. And so that to me was just come on, get on my gears. Come on, you got this, dig deep. And it was more of a mental game than the physical, right? Overcoming the feelings of fatigue. And so I would say focus on the mental toughness as well. And the last thing I would say is, you are privileged to play sport. So be kind and thankful. Always say thanks to the people around you supporting you. Thanks to your coach. Focus on developing yourself as a person. And many of the connections you make in sport as a young youth will come back and influence you down the road. So make sure you have a thankful heart and be a thankful athlete.
Nice. And then finally, if you could tell your younger self one piece of advice, what would you tell her?
Okay, I have a couple for this as well. And I think one of the main ones was find out what pro sports exist for women. Because when I was a kid, like, you didn't see women on TV. And this wasn't that long ago, relatively speaking. Like, I am getting up there, but I didn't see that much pro sport, right? So I would have loved, like, I loved every sport. And I feel like I could have made it in basketball and tennis. And I could have, like, if I with proper coaching, but it just, there was no accessibility. So I would have said, pick a sport that you know is professional for women and pursue it. Because the Olympics is amazing and it's a spectacle, an amazing experience, but it does only happen for every 4 years. And when I moved to cycling, it was like every year the World Cup series and World Championships and the Tour de France and the Giro d'Italia, that was a huge event that I was able to go to. And that was amazing. So I would have gotten pro sport earlier and not necessarily forgot about the Olympic dream, but I certainly would have went a different route and picked a sport that was professional. And although I loved hockey, I would have told myself to get into cycling earlier, because I got into it when I was 25 and I raced for 6 years and kind of forced into retirement because I became pregnant with my daughter, which was beautiful and awesome. But like, it was a shortened career of 6 years that was amazing. And it really felt pro for women. And then the last thing I would say is, like, risk more. Like, instead of being afraid of failure, be afraid of failing at something that doesn't matter. Like, just go for it. And a prime example is this year in the Olympics for the women's road race. The girl who won just went off the front from the beginning. She's never raced in the women's pro peloton. She thought she would her goal is to finish the race. And she surprised everyone and won the race. So, like, just risk. And then just trust your instincts, just go for it. Yeah, I think that's about it. And also I would say to myself, just enjoy life outside of sport a little bit more, because I was so goal focused that I feel like I kind of, like, I missed out on some stuff looking back. Yeah. So, like, there is more to life than just sport. I love sports, but there is more to life than just sports.
Right.
So
those are good answers. And I think that could open the door to a whole other conversation because of women and just the physiological ability to bear children and to want to have a family, and the opportunities that come and go with the decisions that come with that. And so maybe we'll save that for another day, but it was so lovely to talk to you. I love this conversation so much. And there's some things that we didn't get to, but I think what we did hit up was amazing, and it'll give a lot of people some insight into a lot of different areas. So hydration for sure, but then also your story is very impactful. And I just want to say thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. I loved it. I love chatting with you, especially a very successful athlete yourself. So it's been great. And for your listeners too, if anyone wants to contact me with questions, I can give them my email or whatever it may be, they can contact me.
Yeah, so that's great that you're accessible, and you're obviously teaching the next generation with everything and inspiring a whole other group of people. And so, yeah, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Heather.
Oh, thank you. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
If anybody would like to check out these conversations, you can get this podcast wherever you find your podcast, and I will see you guys on the next episode. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.